Robert Dell. 56-year-old Florida pastor Robert Dell emphasized morality in many of his sermons, but he apparently didn't always practice what he preached, according to authorities who accused him of turning his halfway house in St. Petersburg into the headquarters of a Home Depot theft ring. In August of 2023, federal investigators arrested Robert, his 36-year-old wife Jacqueline Dell, his 72-year-old mother Karen Hurley Dell, and 2 additional accomplices, Daniel Mace and Jessica Wild, in connection with the scheme. According to prosecutors, Dell was the ringleader of the operation, which involved stealing $1.4 million worth of goods from Home Depot stores across Florida and reselling the merchandise online. Additionally, Dell is accused of abusing his roles as a pastor and at the halfway house in order to convince people to participate in the operation. It's believed that the theft went on for as many as 10 years, which means the total amount of stolen goods is likely higher than $1.4 million, which is based on a 6-month estimate of store losses. While 2 suspects not related to Dell were tasked with the actual stealing, Dell's wife and mother reportedly handled payments, shipping, and managing the ring's eBay account. Anointed liquidator. At the time of the arrests, Dell had not worked as a preacher in 2.5 years, having apparently turned his full attention to his Home Depot theft ring. He pleaded not guilty to racketeering, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and dealing in stolen property, and the case appears to be ongoing. Number 13. Emmi Fernandez. In July of 2016, former police lieutenant Emmi Fernandez was accused of breaking into the Coral Gables home of her ex-boyfriend, former Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Alvarez. Police were called to the residence in the middle of the night after a neighbor saw Fernandez hitting a window with a floor tile from outside. Fernandez answered the door when officers arrived. Her shin was bleeding and there was blood all over the apartment. A metal decoration had fallen and injured her leg, and she had tried unsuccessfully to clean up the blood. There were no signs of forced entry, despite Fernandez not having a key to the newly changed locks, leaving it unclear how she got inside. She told the police she was there to retrieve her belongings, but Alvarez wasn't home and didn't want her there, so she was arrested on suspicion of burglary to an unoccupied structure and criminal mischief. The charges were later dropped. Fernandez ended up retiring after her arrest, and she made headlines yet again in October of 23 when she was accused of shooting at a different ex-boyfriend. According to prosecutors, she drove up next to the victim, asked him if he wanted her to shoot him, and fired several bullets in his direction. She then retreated to a relative's home and barricaded herself inside, setting off a 14-hour-long standoff with the police. The ex-boyfriend, who is also a former police officer, told police that Fernandez had stalked him on multiple prior occasions following the end of their 18-month relationship. During the standoff, Fernandez's family members cooperated with law enforcement's orders to leave the house, but Fernandez remained firmly planted in the home's attic, giving police no choice but to forcibly extricate her from the home with the use of an armored lift. She was charged with attempted first-degree murder with a deadly weapon, resisting an officer with violence, battery on a police officer, discharging a firearm from a vehicle, and shooting a deadly missile. Fernandez remains held without bond amid her ongoing case. Number 12. Nick Kachi. On a Saturday evening in September of 2024, Hampden County Sheriff Nick Kachi was arrested outside the MGM Casino in Springfield, Massachusetts, on suspicion of driving while intoxicated. He had left the sheriff's office SUV running in the valet area with a missing tire and other damage. Shortly after spotting the vehicle, police saw Kachi exiting the casino and walk into the SUV. In an arrest report, a state police officer noted observing several signs of intoxication, including the smell of alcohol, slurred speech, and bloodshot eyes. Kachi reportedly told the officer that he had popped his tire while turning a corner, but surveillance footage proved that this was untrue. He also claimed that his friend had been driving the SUV, but eventually admitted that he was the one behind the wheel, telling the officer that he had driven to the casino after golfing at a country club and having a few beers. After reportedly declining to undergo a sobriety test, he was arrested on suspicion of a misdemeanor operating while intoxicated charge. Kachi also refused to take a breathalyzer. He initially pleaded not guilty but quickly changed his mind and admitted that there were enough facts to convict him. As long as he avoids further legal trouble for a year, he'll avoid a conviction. In the meantime, his driver's license has been suspended. Speaking with 22 News, Kachi publicly apologized for falling short of the high standards he set for himself. He said he takes full responsibility for his actions and that he looks forward to moving forward with his service to the community. Number 11. Jessica Lawson. Early one morning in November 2023, a police officer in St. Anthony, Idaho, pulled over a car without its tail lights on. Behind the wheel was a teenage boy who explained that the car's owner, a 36-year-old former school teacher named Jessica Lawson, had told him to drive because she was too drunk. Lawson was not in the vehicle at the time and the teen received a ride home from the police. The following day, the boy's parents told law enforcement that their son said Lawson had picked him up and taken him to her house at 11 p.m. the night before. Lawson drank alcohol, the teen used marijuana, and intimacy occurred. As it turned out, the boy was an at-risk youth who had just been adopted days before the incident, after bouncing around between foster homes throughout his childhood. And while Lawson denied that anything physical had happened, the young man's parents didn't believe her, and neither did the authorities. Lawson faced a slew of felonies based on the allegations and ended up pleading guilty to some of the charges in exchange for others being dropped. She was sentenced to 2 to 20 years in prison, was banned from communicating with the victim for 2 decades, and must register as an offender and take classes to correct her behavior. During Lawson's sentencing hearing, the victim's mother explained that her son struggles to differentiate between safe and unsafe situations due to the things he had experienced throughout his life. Both his parents expressed concerns that the full mental and emotional effects of Lawson's actions had not yet sunk in for the young man, who believed that the worst of his mental trauma is yet to come. Number 10. Sheldon Johnson. While serving prison time for attempted murder, Blood's gang member Sheldon Johnson focused on turning his life around. He became a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform and landed a job as a youth counselor with the public law firm Queen's Defenders following his release in May of 2023. Less than a year later, however, he found himself back in custody and facing his most serious charges yet. In March of 2024, Johnson was arrested in connection with the murder of 44-year-old Colin Small, who was killed inside his Bronx apartment. The discovery of Small's death came during the early morning hours, when NYPD officers responded to a 911 call about shots being fired inside an apartment building in the Highbridge neighborhood. A neighbor told police she heard someone pleading for their life between multiple gunshots. She continued to watch as a man she didn't recognize carried cleaning supplies in and out of the unit. The woman alerted the building superintendent, who checked the security footage and saw that the man had suspiciously changed his outfit several times during his repeated trips in and out of Small's apartment. At one point, the suspect could be seen wearing a feminine blonde wig and sunglasses. After noticing that the man had not exited the apartment after entering with a large blue bin, the superintendent called the police. When officers knocked on the door, Johnson answered. Inside the apartment, the cops found Small's dismembered remains, including his head, arms, and legs, which were in the freezer. His torso and feet were inside the blue bin Johnson had been seen wheeling into the unit. Johnson is facing charges of murder, manslaughter, and criminal possession of a weapon. He's currently being held at Rikers Island without bail as he awaits trial. According to sources, Johnson and Small may have had a beef with one another while previously serving time at Sing Sing together, but the nature of the circumstances leading up to the murder remain unconfirmed. Number 9. Robert Corey Sasser. In May of 2018, a Glynn County, Georgia police lieutenant named Robert Corey Sasser was arrested for threatening to kill his estranged wife, 34-year-old Katie Kettles Sasser, and her boyfriend, Johnny Edward Hall Jr. 41-year-old Robert was also accused of trying to kick in the door to Katie's McIntosh County home. The Sassers had separated 3 months earlier, and Robert claimed he was at Katie's house to retrieve his vehicle keys. He was placed on unpaid leave from his job due to his criminal charges, but was allowed to bail out of jail as he waited for the case to move forward in court. Following his arrest, Robert landed back in custody following a standoff with law enforcement in Glynn County. Prior to the police arriving at the scene, he had shown up at a restaurant where Katie and Johnny were eating and made a gun gesture with his hand. Robert was arrested on a gun charge and was allowed to bail out of jail yet again, despite a gunshot being fired during the confrontation with the police. About a week after the second incident, officers responded to a report of shots fired at Katie's house. They noticed Robert speeding away from the scene and pulled him over, but he sped off. In the meantime, Katie and Johnny were found dead inside the residence from gunshot wounds. Robert refused to pull over for pursuing officers. He drove all the way to his house, where he refused to exit his vehicle. A SWAT team formed a perimeter around the car and shot tear gas into the vehicle to try forcing him out, but he didn't budge. And when the team approached the vehicle several hours later, Robert was dead. Prior to her murder, Katie had pleaded with law enforcement to help keep her safe. She feared for her life, and it was clear to her that Robert wasn't going to stop stalking and harassing her, but he kept getting released after each arrest, leading her to doubt that the authorities were taking her concerns seriously. At the time of the double homicide, Robert was banned from entering the county where Katie lived, except to attend his court hearings. He was under the supervision of a probation officer and had permission to be in the area on the night of the crime. Just hours before the murders, Robert had bought a gun and ammunition to carry out his plan with. In the wake of Katie's death, her mother sued Glynn County, arguing that her daughter might still be alive if law enforcement had treated Robert as a legitimate threat to her safety. According to the lawsuit, responding officers had even joked about Robert giving Katie's house a good old Glynn County police knock after he tried breaking her door down. The plaintiff also accused the officers of requiring Katie to give her vehicle keys to Robert in order to receive help vacating him from the property. Katie's mother received a $1 million payout, but no amount of money will ever bring her daughter back, serving as a reminder of the devastating consequences that can come along with missed opportunities to protect someone from danger. Number 8. Dan Howard. In January of 2021, 48-year-old Kianti Howard told her husband of 26 years, former Idaho State Trooper Daniel Howard, that she wanted a divorce. Just days later, Dan dialed 911 and reported finding his wife dead in the bathtub at their Kootenai County home with a gunshot wound to the head. Kianti's loved ones immediately suspected Dan of murdering her, but there wasn't enough evidence to make any arrests at the time. Investigators also noticed some inconsistencies, including no actual tears coming from Dan's eyes, despite his hysterical crying. They also found it odd that Dan reported hearing a thud from another room, but said that he waited 2 hours to investigate the source of the noise. Police continued working to build a case over the next 2 years, and in July of 2023, Dan was charged with Kianti's murder. During the trial in 2024, the prosecution accused Dan of killing Kianti in a rage and staging it to look accidental after learning that she planned to pursue half of his assets in the divorce. Despite being shot in the head, there was evidence to suggest that Kianti had been killed using a restrained method typically only known to police and self-defense experts, further pointing toward Dan's possible involvement in her death. Meanwhile, the defense stood by Dan's claims of innocence, arguing that Kianti's death was accidental. Following a 10-day trial, the jury found Dan guilty of second-degree murder and domestic battery, landing him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 7. Abnal Roberts. In April of 2024, emergency responders rushed to the scene of a reported fire in Colwyn, Pennsylvania, where they found a Land Rover engulfed in flames with black smoke pouring into the sky. The vehicle had been set ablaze using alcohol and a lighter, and investigators quickly identified the owner's next-door neighbor as the prime suspect in the case. 18-year-old Abnal Roberts was a junior volunteer firefighter with the neighboring Yeadon Fire Department. He attempted to assist firefighters with the use of his garden hose as they fought to extinguish the flames, but later admitted to starting the fire. Roberts was charged with 9 crimes, including arson and reckless endangerment, and was suspended from the fire department with plans to terminate his membership, pending the outcome of his charges. Records show that he's currently out on bail amid his ongoing case, and his alleged motive for the crime remains unclear. Number 6. Oscar Diaz. In July of 2019, California priest Father Oscar Diaz got into a car accident in Sonoma County and suffered a hip injury. Inside his vehicle, police found several bags containing more than $18,000 in parish donations. Diaz claimed that the money was his salary, but officers were skeptical, so they investigated further and discovered that he had stolen at least $95,000 total from various parishes. In an unexpected twist, however, police said that they were unsure whether they had sufficient evidence of Diaz's guilt to pursue criminal charges. Parish members had mixed reactions which ranged from anger to shock to forgiveness. A church bishop wrote that Diaz had been stealing from the church for 15 years, including in the form of checks to the parish that he deposited into his personal bank account. The bishop declined to reveal any more details, and the church resolved to handle the matter internally. Number 5. Kianti Harris. In January of 2013, 3 murder victims were found inside an abandoned Dodge Charger along an interstate exit in Union City, Georgia. 32-year-old Cheryl Colquitt Thompson, 33-year-old Kononis King, and 43-year-old Rodney Cottrell had been lured to a residence in Jonesboro, where they were tortured and killed. King and Cottrell had been asphyxiated in the back seat, while Colquitt Thompson's body was found strangled in the trunk. The case went unsolved for more than 10 years until May of 2024, when 4 men were charged with 3 counts each of malice murder. Police identified the suspects as Kenneth Thompson, Kevin Harris, Darrell Harris, and a 45-year-old assistant middle school principal from Alabama named Kianti Harris, who was immediately placed on leave from his job as soon as news of the charges came out. Records revealed that Harris had been working in education since 2006. He and his alleged co-conspirators were extradited to Georgia from 3 different states and are currently in pre-trial detention. Authorities have revealed very little about the case, including whether the 3 suspects named Harris are related and how they finally linked them to the crime after so many years. Number 4. David Wejnarowski. In February of 2024, police in Warren County Township responded to a call about a drunk shoplifter at a local Walmart store where 39-year-old priest David Wejnarowski was accused of stealing ice cream and oven mitts at around 10:15 p.m. Wejnarowski sped off from the scene, leading law enforcement on a high-speed chase, which eventually ended in someone's front yard. Inside his vehicle, police found open alcohol containers and the stolen items from Walmart. Wejnarowski was charged with disorderly persons, shoplifting, second-degree eluding police, drunk driving, having an open container of alcohol in the car. According to police, his blood alcohol content was more than twice the legal limit. Shortly after his arrest, Wejnarowski stepped down from his position as pastor of St. Mary Church in Alpha. A diocese spokesperson acknowledged that it was clear that the priest has an alcohol problem, adding that Wejnarowski was extremely remorseful for his conduct and planned to seek necessary treatment in order to prevent a similar incident from happening again in the future. Number 3. Paula Pace Banaszewski. Sylvia Likens was tortured to death in Indiana in 1965 by a family friend named Gertrude Banaszewski, who encouraged her own children to join in on the violence. The teenager and her sister Jenny had been left in Gertrude's care while their father, who was a carnival worker, traveled for work, and their mother was in jail for shoplifting. The girl's father had agreed to pay Gertrude $20 per week to keep an eye on the sisters. When the payment came late one week, Gertrude embarked on the campaign of torture which would ultimately claim Sylvia's life, and the abuse continued even after Gertrude received the money the following day. Gertrude and her kids beat, burned, force-fed, and humiliated Sylvia. They put cigarettes out on her skin, shoved her down staircases, practiced martial arts on her, forced her to take scalding hot baths, and literally poured salt into her wounds. Eventually, Sylvia's body couldn't take any more abuse. Her last days were spent in anguish on Gertrude's cold basement floor. And while many people in the neighborhood knew about the torture, very few tried to seek help for Sylvia. Those who did were unsuccessful with their efforts. 6 people were charged with Sylvia's murder, including Gertrude and her daughter Paula, while at least 5 suspects were arrested on lesser charges. Gertrude served a 20-year prison sentence. Paula Banaszewski, who was around the same age as Sylvia, was convicted of a reduced manslaughter charge and spent just a handful of years in prison before being released in 1972. After finishing her parole, Paula moved to Iowa, where she went by the last name Pace. In 1998, she began working as a teacher's aide for special needs students, with her superiors and co-workers unaware of her role in Sylvia's murder. Paula continued to fly under the radar until 2024, when an anonymous tipster outed her to the local police and the school district she worked for. Investigators confirmed Paula's identity, and the 7-member board voted to fire her from her job. A school district spokesperson declined to comment on how she had managed to circumvent their standard background check procedure. Today's topic was requested by Cherry Oki C 3546 and Dragon Lover 1788. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jayen Fleer. Over a 2-week period during the spring of 2020, a married 27-year-old San Diego County Sheriff's deputy named Jayen Fleer used Snapchat to seek inappropriate relations with at least 4 teenage girls. He sent explicit photos of himself, offered money for certain intimate acts, and actually met up with his victims to make these exchanges. Additionally, he contacted at least 41 other teens in his quest for illicit satisfaction. Fleer fell under investigation just weeks later after Crime Stoppers received a tip about his illegal activity regarding one victim. The caller did not mention Fleer's name, but the information they provided led police to identify him as a suspect. Further investigation revealed the existence of 3 more victims, none of whom knew each other and who had all connected with Fleer on social media. During questioning in July of 2020, Fleer portrayed himself as a devoted husband and father-to-be whose main focus was on his growing family, but he was quick to end the interview as soon as the detective began asking him direct questions about his alleged crimes and suspicious online activity. Fleer ultimately pleaded guilty to 20 charges relating mostly to lewdness and crimes against minors. During his sentencing hearing, his defense attorney urged the judge to consider his lack of a prior criminal record, his willingness to take responsibility for his crimes, his expressions of remorse, and his decision to voluntarily enter counseling for his problem. Meanwhile, the state pushed for an 18-year sentence and the judge imposed a 12-year term. Next, right after number 1, are chilling cases of athletes ruining their lives and careers. Stick around for our previous release of When Throwing Your Life Away Goes Wrong. Stick around. Number 1. Fidel Rodriguez. In May of 2024, a 66-year-old Florida priest was accused of biting a woman's hand during a Sunday Mass at St. Thomas Aquinas Church in St. Cloud. Father Fidel Rodriguez told the woman that she hadn't met the requirements to receive communion and sent her away. 2 hours later, the woman returned to the church and tried to take communion again. When Rodriguez asked her if she had confessed, she said it wasn't his business, but he relented and offered her communion. According to the priest, the difficult worshipper grabbed and crushed a handful of communion wafers. A struggle ensued as Rodriguez tried getting the woman to let go of the hosts, and she was asked to leave the church. Describing the hosts as cookies, she accused Rodriguez of biting her arm in his attempts to get her to drop the wafers, and witnesses corroborated her version of events. It's unclear whether Rodriguez was criminally charged, but his church released a statement expressing its support, despite not necessarily condoning the way he handled the situation. On July the 31st of 2022, at approximately 5:30 a.m., Mackenzie Sharilla was in the driver's seat of a Toyota Camry with her boyfriend, 20-year-old Dominic Russo, by her side, and his friend, teenager Davion Flanagan, in the back seat. The 3 of them had been smoking marijuana while traveling through the suburb of Strongsville in Cleveland, Ohio. Sharilla was driving on a path she didn't usually choose, but one that she'd visited days before. In hindsight, it would be interpreted as her doing research. The Plidco building, a large brick building at the intersection of Progress and Alameda Drives, then came into view. An examination of the car's black box would reveal that instead of braking, Shirilla accelerated towards a brick wall and crashed into it at 100 miles per hour. Russo and 19-year-old Flanagan died on the spot. Police were called to the scene roughly 45 minutes after the crash. Shirilla was hospitalized and recovered after undergoing multiple surgeries. The fatal accident was followed by an investigation, and police discovered that approximately 2 weeks prior to the incident, Shirilla had had an argument with her boyfriend. She was overheard threatening him over the phone that she would crash her vehicle. Shirilla and Russo's relationship was described as toxic, and in the month leading up to the incident, the former verbally abused her boyfriend on multiple occasions and damaged his belongings in fits of rage. During her trial, Shirilla was dubbed Hell on Wheels, and the prosecution showed social media videos of her attending a concert and celebrating Halloween in the crash's aftermath. One TikTok video, which wasn't presented in court, showed the teen bragging that she was one of those girls who can do a lot of drugs and not die. In August of 2023, 19-year-old Shirilla was convicted on multiple counts, including murder, and was subsequently sentenced to 2 concurrent 15 years to life sentences. Her driver's license was suspended for life as well. Shirilla apologized to the victims' families in court, referring to Russo as her soulmate, but claimed that she didn't remember the accident. The sentencing judge, however, contended she had a mission and she executed it with precision. The mission was death. Number 6. Natalie Navaro. Police in Garland, Texas, received reports about a man who was unresponsive inside his car on August 29th of 2023. Officers dispatched to the scene in Audubon Park found 21-year-old Arturo Pena dead in his vehicle after he'd been fatally shot. The man was reported missing to the Dallas Police Department 2 days prior. On September the 1st, the authorities issued an Amber Alert for Natalie Navaro, a teenager who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances from an apartment complex in East Dallas. Within hours of the alert being issued, investigators identified her as a person of interest in Pena's death, along with 21-year-old Yordi Martinez. The incident was suspected to have been a robbery gone wrong in which Navaro lured Pena to the park, where he was gunned down by Martinez. Updates on the matter indicated that Navaro had been located and arrested on murder charges, while Martinez was believed to have fled to Mexico. As of mid-September of 2023, he hadn't been found. The young man had a rap sheet that included a felony indictment for shooting a gun into a house in Garland in November of 2022. Number 5. Dimitri Popof. On the evening of July the 29th of 2023, New York City dancer and professional choreographer O'Shea Sibley was at a gas station in Midwood, Brooklyn with a group of friends. The group had spent the day at the beach celebrating a birthday and were in high spirits as they were pumping gas and dancing while listening to Beyoncé. They were then confronted by a different group who was leaving the convenience store and who hurled homophobic and racist slurs at them. One of the verbal abusers reportedly claimed that the dancing was offensive to his religion. Sibley, a gay man, confronted the group and attempted to de-escalate the situation. The conflict devolved into physical violence shortly thereafter. Teenager Dimitri Popof was captured on CCTV fighting Sibley one-on-one. At some point during the altercation, Sibley was stabbed in the torso by Popof. The blade pierced the dancer's heart and he became unresponsive in spite of his friends' efforts to revive him. Sibley was taken to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. Following the incident, Popof surrendered to law enforcement in Brooklyn on August the 4th. Less than a week later, the teenager was charged with second-degree murder as a hate crime and criminal possession of a weapon. He was held without bail and faced at least 20 years in prison if convicted. Popof pleaded not guilty during a subsequent court appearance. The high school senior was set to be tried as an adult, with his next court date scheduled for October of 2023. Number 4. Montserrat Carrillo Castilla. 19-year-old Montserrat Carrillo Castillo and her friend Haley Parchmont were invited to a restaurant by 36-year-old Willie Honorable Jr. on March the 6th of 2016. The latter was an aspiring rapper and record producer who recently moved to Texas from California. The girls, both dancers and escorts, were promised dinner and $500. After the meal, Honorable took Carrillo Castillo and Parchmont to the house he was renting in Cinco Ranch. where he was allegedly running an escort business. Coro Castilla reportedly came to realize that the man was not their client, but was trying to recruit them instead. Parchment agreed to go upstairs with Honorable while he showed her the house. They were reported to have had intercourse, and at the end of the night, Parchment and Coro Castilla left without receiving any pay. The latter was the last person seen leaving Honorable's home before the man was found dead, with 3 gunshot wounds to the back of his head. His $30,000 watch had also been stolen. An investigation was launched, but officers couldn't find any forensic evidence, as it appeared that the killer had meticulously cleaned the scene, removing blood, hair, and any potential DNA. Coro Castilla was identified as the primary suspect, and she was charged with murder but pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's case hinged on witnesses to whom Coro Castilla had allegedly confessed the killing. Her suspected motive was that she'd sought revenge after Honorable had allegedly forced himself on Parchment. While the two were upstairs, Coro Castilla allegedly texted another friend to complain that they'd been sent to a man who wasn't a client and who was already running an escort operation. Parchment was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she stated in court that Coro Castilla had confessed the murder to her. The defense attorney argued that Coro Castilla was a girl who'd gone the wrong path and had become caught up in the dangerous underworld of human trafficking. The young woman's defense proposed that the killing had actually been carried out by a rival escort runner because Honorable was trying to poach his workers. The prosecution stated that Coro Castilla was trying to use her violent friends as an excuse and that she should be held accountable for the murder. The jury ultimately found Coro Castilla not guilty of the murder in July of 2018. Number 3. Nico Brown. On August 29th of 2023, a mother and her daughter were in the living room of their home in the Carver Shores neighborhood of Orlando, Florida. At around 8:20 p.m., bullets pierced through the wall of the room and struck them both. They were consequently taken to a local hospital. The mother survived, but her daughter, who was identified as Ajalia Hashim, received medical care for 2 days before succumbing to her injuries. An investigation revealed that the fatal bullets had come from a drive-by shooting that had been carried out on their street. One of Wright's neighbors heard rapid gunshots and called 911 on the day of the incident. The shooting had also resulted in the death of 19-year-old Isaiah Wright. In September of 2023, local law enforcement arrested teenager Nico Brown in connection to the incident. Even though he'd been accused of killing 2 people, Brown flashed a smile to the cameras while he was taken to a patrol vehicle in handcuffs. As of the latest updates on the matter, Brown was expected to face charges of first-degree homicide. The authorities didn't confirm whether Isaiah Wright was the target of the shooting. Number 2. Therese Poe. While still in his teens, rapper Therese Poe, who performed as Kachi, rose to prominence on the drill rap scene in Jacksonville, Florida with a breakout hit called Tired of Shooting. Poe frequently aimed lyrics at his street rivals, which made him a favorite among hip-hop bloggers and fans, but also resulted in a series of bloody street feuds. On March the 19th of 2020, Poe, aged 19 at the time, was on a date with his girlfriend, high school senior and cheerleader Inandi Weich. As she was dropping off Poe at the Sherwood Forest community, a gray vehicle pulled up and opened fire on them. Weich was shot dead while Poe was non-fatally injured. 21-year-old Roland Ball Jr. and teenager Javion Porter were arrested for the drive-by. It was determined that the hit was meant for Poe in retaliation for the fatal shooting of 20-year-old Daquan Saxton, which had occurred 2 days prior. 5 months after the death of his girlfriend on August the 3rd of 2020, Jacksonville law enforcement found Poe in a vacant lot with a gunshot wound to his leg. Officers were responding to a call about a shootout in progress at a convenience store nearby. An AR-15 rifle was also found roughly 70 yards from Poe, along with a spent shell casing and a hoodie with holes cut in the hood, made for it to double as a mask when worn backwards. An examination of the evidence from the scene would later reveal that Poe's DNA was on both the rifle and the sweatshirt. After the incident, the rapper released a song describing a similar situation to the one in which he'd found himself in August of 2020. He rapped about being shot, dropping his gun, stripping the hoodie, and being saved when the police arrived at the scene. Prosecutors took the lyrics into consideration and pointed to them as evidence of Poe's participation in the incident. In February of 2021, Poe was charged with being a gang-related felon in possession of a firearm. In the spring of 2023, after less than an hour of deliberations, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to 12 years behind bars. At the time, Poe had an active murder case stemming from an incident that had occurred on September the 28th of 2021. Leading up to it, he'd been feuding with area rapper Spinner Benz, Noah Williams by his real name. He was one of several rappers in the viral video for the song Who I Smoke, in which they openly boasted about people they'd gunned down, including Poe's best friend, Adrian Gaynor, also known as Bibby. In September, Williams was live streaming on social media when he accidentally revealed his location. He was sitting in a Dodge Challenger with two other rappers at a gas station when a black Range Rover Evoque pulled up and opened fire on them. As Williams and another man fled, their companion, named Xavier, aka No Face, was left behind and he was fatally shot in the head. The following day, local police chased after a vehicle matching the description of the SUV from the scene. The Evoque crashed into a pole during the pursuit and two people exited the vehicle attempting to run off. Officers caught the duo and identified them as Poe and another rapper, Lorano Span, who went by Lil Cracker. Poe was charged with second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and gun possession by a convicted felon, while Span was charged with resisting arrest. Number 1. Jennifer Elizabeth Marie Broxson. On October the 22nd of 2020, Florida teenager Jennifer Elizabeth Marie Broxson texted a man on Snapchat and arranged to meet up with him for intimate relations. The unnamed man subsequently drove to pick Broxson up. At the meetup spot, the teenager asked if her friend, teenager Allison Marie DeJanes, could come along, and the man agreed. Broxson then instructed him to drive them to the Simpson Riverboat fishing pier in Pace. By that point, the man had begun feeling uncomfortable as the teens kept complimenting his car and asking him questions about it. Upon arriving at the pier, Broxson told the man, "We gotta be real with you. We run a business," and announced that they were robbing and carjacking him. Broxson claimed that her friend had a Glock 17 and ordered the victim to step away from the vehicle and leave his keys behind. The man did as commanded until the teenagers demanded that he hand them his cell phone as well. A fight broke out. The teens tried to pepper spray him, but the victim managed to wedge himself in the driver's side door and began strangling DeJanes, who was screaming at her friend to get the gun. It would emerge that the teens had lied about having a firearm. As the victim was choking DeJanes, Broxson came at him from behind and attacked him with a stun gun, as well as a hammer, which she used to strike him in the head and body. The man was eventually able to retrieve his pistol from under his driver's side. Fearing that the girls would brandish their Glock, he shot them both multiple times. He then drove off, called 911, and waited for law enforcement. The teens were taken to a hospital where Broxson was treated for her gunshot injuries while DeJanes was pronounced dead after she'd been shot 7 times. Broxson was charged with the second-degree murder of her friend because she was committing the felony that resulted in her death. Broxson, whose mugshot showed her with the tattoo of a broken heart on her cheek, was also charged with aggravated battery, carjacking, and obstructing justice. Thanks for watching. If your best friend's dad had a $5 million FBI bounty on his head for a financial crime that he committed, would you rat him out? Let us know in the comments section below.